I rise in opposition to the underlying bill. You know, a mother's greatest fear is not being able to provide food and security for her children, not being able to provide nourishment for her kids to grow and to learn. She worries about where she will find their next meal. Each morning, she is greeted by growling stomachs and an all too familiar sense of anxiety. This mother is desperate to provide food for her hungry children and depends on our local food banks. But when she arrives at the food bank, she finds that the shelves are empty, a time at which her anxiety turns to fear and desperation. Some of you might think that I'm exaggerating, but if you come to my district and visit the city of Cleveland and other parts of my district, you can meet people who, for them, this is their reality. Just as it is the reality for people throughout this nation who rely on essential nutrition programs like TEFAP, WIC, and SNAP. The Emergency Food Assistance Program, better known as TEFAP, provides food to low-income Americans in need of short-term hunger relief through food banks. This bill caps TEFAP funding at $200 million, which is a $51 million cut. And in addition to that, another $12 million in grants for TEFAP for storage and distribution equipment is also being cut. These cuts affect the storage of food that requires refrigeration, forcing many food banks to only provide unhealthy, non-perishable foods. And to my friend, Mr. Kingston, there is indeed a correlation between hunger and obesity. 25% of the food distributed at Cleveland food banks is from TEFAP, and it is some of the most nutritious food they have available. Even without the cuts that are proposed in this bill, food banks are facing a shortage of food, impairing their ability to provide for their communities. Parents turn to food banks, especially in the summer when school is out, when their children no longer have a guaranteed breakfast and or lunch 5 days a week. And it didn't stop at TEFAP. Also on the chopping block is funding for WIC and SNAP. Nearly 50% of the babies born in this country each year rely on WIC. Proposed cuts to SNAP and WIC would result in hundreds of thousands of low-income women, infants and children losing needed assistance. These massive cuts to WIC would force vulnerable families to go hungry, to be completely dependent on food banks, which unfortunately are losing vital funding through this legislation. WIC provides food to almost 9 million low-income pregnant and nursing women and young children. This bill cuts WIC by over $800 million, and it's estimated that because of these cuts, between 350,000 and 475,000 mothers and young children will be eliminated from the program. If we can just get rid of the tax breaks for millionaires and billionaires for 1 week, as my colleague has said, we could pay for the entire WIC program for an entire year. These cuts will cripple families and could have a detrimental effect on the future of these children. A quarter of the people in my district have difficulty accessing affordable food. But the chairman, Mr. Rogers, indicated, and I quote, "This legislation reflects hard decisions to cut lower priority programs so that our nation continues on the path to fiscal recovery. To a hungry child, SNAP and WIC are not low priority programs. These cuts will not set our nation on a path to recovery, but rather make it significantly more difficult for mothers to ensure the safety and health of their children. So what we are doing is punishing children for being poor. That is what we're doing. We're not talking about necessarily adults. Children have done nothing to us. I don't know how we sleep at night. The Bible tells us, and I know my friends like to talk about faith, and I'm a person of strong faith. The Bible tells us that the poor will always be among us. And so we need to make the provisions to take care of the poor. First, Republicans came after seniors who rely on Medicare, and now they're coming after children and mothers who rely on food assistance. Who's next, Mr. Chair? I urge my colleagues to oppose this legislation and protect our children and